Scum. That's how I regard the two ISIS jihadis captured in Syria in January, caught only after they'd conducted kidnapping, beheading and torture. The question now is what happens to them and where? All of my emotions tell me the only thing for them is to tie them to a pole in Wembley Stadium and sell tickets and let people do whatever they want to them. However, my logic says that death is the outcome they crave, to die a martyr for their warped cause. How does that mean that justice was done? Bringing them back to the UK and imprisoning them here will cost us taxpayers millions. And besides, if they're no longer UK citizens, why are they our problem? Should this fall to The Hague as a matter of an international war crime? I don't know. For once, I'm truly stumped.
So Michelle, as for the emotions you expressed, I'm with you entirely. These two and the other two that were with them only engender in me an absolute and total disgust, not least because they do what they do in my name and people like me in the name of Islam. In fact, I'm so disgusted that one of the most frustrating things is, and I used to be guilty of it myself, when the media used to refer to them as the Beatles, because actually I think that completely understates the seriousness of what they do. It makes a mockery of one of our best British musical exports. They should be called ISIS Execution Cell. That's what they were. They were executing innocent people and torturing them, as you said. And so it's absolutely, I think, unfortunate that they've, basically this moniker has been developed for them, which actually really does kind of sell short the seriousness and the gravity of what they've done. Now, the problem with the trial situation is this. I'm not so concerned of what they want. They may well want to die and become martyrs. Frankly, I don't give a damn what they want. What I care about is who we are and what we represent. And I think that part of the problem in the so-called war on terror is so often, too often, we have compromised on what we represent as the moral high ground in challenging these scum. I think Guantanamo Bay, I think the invasion of countries, I think a resorting to arbitrary execution ourselves through drone strikes and torture in some instances has also meant that we've fallen short in the reasons, the very reasons we're morally disgusted at them, and we as a state and a country have sometimes fallen foul of those same moral quagmires. So I think as a result, we need to use this as an opportunity to reassert what we stand for, which is the rule of law, democracy and justice, and bring them to trial. Now, the problem with trial is that the Americans have Guantanamo as an option. I don't think that should be an option, nor does the former reviewer of government terrorism legislation, Lord Carlisle. And of course, they don't recognise the jurisdiction of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which leaves us with one option, and one option alone, and that is to try them in Britain. And one of the things I find so sad is a bit like parents of radicalised terrorists who are absolutely in denial when they find out that their children have committed acts of terrorism. They say, my son would never do something like that. No, my son... And then when they realise their son has done something like that, they completely disavow them rather than take responsibility. I think sometimes our country falls prey to that as well. We've got to face up to the fact that these executioners for ISIS, all four of them, were produced in Britain. Something's going wrong in our communities. Something's going wrong with the state of integration in this country. Something's going wrong within Muslim communities, to be more specific. And we've got to own that. And as a result of owning it, I think we've got to try them in this country and take responsibility for what we sent to the rest of the world.
I want to, I'm interested in everybody else's opinion, but I'm more so interested in yours. So before I move on to everybody else, you said about what we've created in this country and delivered to the rest of the world. I'm trying to think of a sensitive way to bring up what I'm about to bring up, and I'm failing, so I'll just say it bluntly.
Say it, it's fine, yeah.
Wasn't you arrested and detained for a very long time in Egypt for links to Islamist extremism?
Yeah, a group that remains legal in this country. But, so to make that very clear, there was no hint of or no suggestion of violence by the Egyptian government. We were detained as Amnesty International adopted prisoners of conscience for having ideas that were against the Egyptian state. Those ideas that I now...
What changed your mind? How did you change? How do we... Because what I'm fascinated about, before I bring everyone else in, I hate these two people. I hate what they've done, what they stand for. Is it possible to change those two people's minds? And very briefly, how do we do that?
Well, it is possible, but it's incredibly inefficient and highly unlikely, and especially when you cross that line. And that's why I began by saying that we never crossed a line into violence. We had reprehensible ideas that I've now dedicated the rest of my life to, the last 10 years, challenging, as you know. But when you cross that line into violence, first of all, the criminal justice system has to kick in. And second of all, just statistically, it's a lot harder to bring somebody back from that, and demonstrably, it isn't working at the moment. Last thing I'll say, Greg, last thing I'll say. So that's why the best focus is on prevention rather than treatment. And we've got to look at how to stop people becoming these sorts of monsters again in the future.
Can I just, maybe I can just show a clip. One of the people who was executed by these guys was a guy called James Foley, and his mother has talked about what should happen to them. It's worth watching.
Well, I would prefer a federal criminal court, be that in the UK or the US or The Hague, just some country that would be capable to do a public, fair trial.
There is a thought that these men may go straight to Guantanamo Bay. What would your reaction be if that happened?
I would be very against that. It would continue the hatred. Part of, they were executed in orange jumpsuits like used in Guantanamo.
I mean, I agree with you in some ways with that idea that it's abhorrent to us all that they would come back here, but where else do they go? And that's the problem. There's almost nowhere else for them to go. They were British citizens. I think there's still some dispute about whether they are British citizens. If they're going to be tried, they probably should be tried here. But the idea that we're then going to pay to keep them in prison here for the next 30, 40 years
and isn't this
terrible.
the point, the war crimes in Bosnia, we were talking about this before the show, people are still being tried in The Hague now at a huge cost. I don't want a single penny of British taxpayers' money, and these cases would go on for years because we have to gather the evidence, we have to bring it all together. It will cost millions and millions of pounds and take years. And then we put them in prison and they will have to be segregated from other people. I wish that these people had been killed on the battlefield.
Yes, but
they're not. Okay, so I don't want them back in this country. I'm unequivocal. I don't want them back here.
Do you want them?
So
what do I want? I want someone else to take care of them. I don't see why we should. But what do you mean it's easy? They either go to prison here and taxpayers in this country pay millions of pounds to keep them, or they don't. Yeah, well, I don't care. I don't want them here. I don't.
But this is why I think this is a fascinating.
Gavin Williamson said, our defence secretary said, a dead terrorist is not a threat, and that's what I feel.
I respect your view, even though I fundamentally and strongly disagree with it, but I think to have it coming from a government minister is really worrying, because our government doesn't have the option of just abrogating their responsibility and saying it's someone else's problem. I completely agree with you, Majid. I think that this is emotionally it's difficult to accept, but a democracy is something that comes with privileges and responsibilities. You don't just get to opt out of criminal justice when you don't want to pay for it or when it's inconvenient. And it's interesting, and you played James Foley's mother, also Nicolas Hanin, who was also a victim of this group, said he wanted to see them on a fair trial. That's what victims want, and I can see why. They want justice, because that is the appropriate way to deal with people guilty of such terrible
ISIS are very big on justice, aren't they?
Do you see us as equivalent to ISIS, though? Because I see us as far superior.
Well, we are far superior.
So that's why we should be showing our moral superiority.
These two men, and I don't think taxpayers' money should be spent on.
We should just refer to what the Home Secretary has said, who I imagine this decision will partly come down to her. So let's see what Amber Rudd had to say.
What we're looking at is making sure that they do face justice, they do face the full force of the law for their terrible crimes. And we're working with the Americans to find out how that will be done.
If they don't come to the UK, what other realistic options are there?
Well, I'm not going to be drawn on those two particular individuals.
Have they been stripped of their citizenship?
I'm afraid I can't comment on that.
Now, that's a more responsible statement than Gavin Williamson, and I've just got to say on the citizenship question, the jury is out as to whether they are still citizens, but the law in the UK currently doesn't allow the state to render anyone stateless. And one of these in particular, it looks like by his name, Alexander Coty, isn't from a different country and therefore probably converted to the religion and therefore probably can't be rendered have his passport taken away because he wouldn't have any other state, and therefore we are probably obliged in this situation to repatriate these two individuals. And yes, ISIS doesn't stand for justice, but that's what I meant. I think we do.
I think justice in this country will amount to a lot of time.
We've got to stop dumping our toxic waste
One last point,
on
really
other
quickly.
people.
Three-quarters of the people who've been convicted of terrorist offences since 9/11 are now being released. We have got to solve this. We don't have the option. There are people now on our streets who we have not de-radicalised, and that is a problem we can't duck.